I always thought I had everything figured out. At 40, I built a life that many people would envy: steady job, loving wife, 2 beautiful kids, and a house that felt like home. Saturdays were our special days. I would fire up the grill for the family barbecue, a tradition we kept alive every weekend. Neighbors and friends would gather, kids running around, and the air filled with laughter. I cherished those moments, believing they defined the happiness of my life. Maria and I had been married for almost 2 decades, and we'd been through our share of ups and downs. But we'd always found a way to stay connected. She was my rock, the mother of our children, the woman I could count on. She had this warmth about her that could light up any room. We'd grown older, sure, but our relationship, I thought, was stronger than ever. On this particular Saturday, the sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the backyard. The grill sizzled as I flipped burgers, the smell of meat mixing with the faint fragrance of the flowers Maria had planted just a few weeks ago. Ethan and Noah, our sons, were playing soccer with their friends while the neighbors chatted around the table. Everything felt perfect, like any other weekend. But then, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, a man I didn't recognize stood there, holding an envelope. He was in a suit, his expression serious, and he didn't even bother with the usual pleasantries. Before I could ask who he was, he handed the envelope to Maria, who was just a few feet away, helping Noah with his drink. Her smile faltered as she looked at the man, and something about the way she hesitated made my stomach drop. She took the envelope but didn't immediately open it. The air suddenly felt thick, and the sounds of the barbecue seemed to fade into the background. "Maria?" I asked, though I already knew something was wrong. My voice felt shaky, unsure of why the sudden unease had settled in my chest. But she didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the envelope. Then, slowly, she opened it. Her face drained of color as her eyes skimmed the document inside. Her hand trembled, and she took a step back as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. I watched her, frozen in place, the barbecue and the noise around me fading completely. The look on her face, pale, terrified, was enough to make my heart race. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to catch my breath, though I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the answer. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She just handed me the subpoena. The words blurred in front of me as I read. Maria has been named as a witness in a divorce case regarding an affair with David. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. David. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. My colleague, Maria's co-worker. I had never suspected anything more than a professional relationship. But this was real. The betrayal hit me like a freight train, and I struggled to breathe as the weight of the words sank in. I looked up from the document, but Maria had already turned and was rushing to the car. Her face was a mix of panic and fear, as though the world had just collapsed around her. I wanted to call out to her to stop her, but I couldn't find the words. She didn't look back. I stood there for a moment, my hands shaking as I tried to comprehend what had just happened. The man at the door had gone, and the yard was eerily quiet now. I felt like I was suffocating. My mind kept replaying the image of Maria's face, the horror of her reading the subpoena, the cold distance between us now that something had shifted permanently. I looked down at the paper again, my eyes scanning it one more time. The affair, the confirmation of everything I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. It was all true. The life I'd thought was stable, the one I had poured so much into, was now shattered in a single moment. I had no idea where Maria had gone, but I knew I couldn't just stand here, paralyzed. I turned and went inside the house, trying to steady myself, but I couldn't escape the suffocating silence that followed. The noise of the barbecue, the laughter, all of it seemed so distant now. The house felt like a stranger's home, filled with ghosts of the past. I paced back and forth, unsure of what to do next. I tried to focus, to think clearly, but my thoughts were muddled with confusion, hurt, and betrayal. Why? Why had she done this? How long had it been going on? The questions pounded in my head, each one more suffocating than the last. I had to know more. I couldn't just let this moment slip away without understanding the truth. I knew that I couldn't just let it go. Maria had left, and I needed answers. The pain of betrayal was already starting to cut through me like a knife, but I had to understand. I had to find out what had been hidden from me all this time. I went upstairs to our bedroom and began searching. I went through her things methodically, not wanting to miss anything. Her closet, her desk, even a nightstand drawer where she kept her personal items. I found little at first, just her jewelry, her clothes, things that seemed too ordinary to hold the answers I was looking for. But then, buried beneath a pile of old receipts and papers, I found it. A phone. Maria's phone. It had slipped under a stack of books on the dresser, as if it had been placed there carefully. I froze. The phone had been left behind. It was a mistake, or maybe a silent confession. I could feel the weight of the moment. The air felt heavy as I reached for it. It was time to uncover the truth. I had to know. I unlocked the phone, my heart racing as I scrolled through her messages. The first thing I found was a text from David. A short message, one that seemed so innocent on the surface. Asterisk, I miss you. Can't wait to see you again. Asterisk, but as I scrolled deeper, the truth became clearer. Texts, calls, pictures. It was all there. The affair was real. It had been going on for longer than I had imagined. And with each message I read, the weight of betrayal sank deeper. My stomach churned as I felt the sharp pang of hurt, of anger, of disbelief. I sat down on the bed, the phone in my hands trembling. Everything I had thought I knew was a lie. I didn't know who this person was anymore. I didn't know who we were. I felt the tears begin to sting my eyes, but I blinked them away. No, I couldn't cry. Not yet. There was too much to process. Too much to figure out. Maria had disappeared, and I was left with nothing but the fragments of a life that had been destroyed in a single moment. But I knew one thing for sure. My world had just changed forever. The silence in the house was deafening. It was as if the world had come to a standstill. Maria had been gone for hours, and yet it felt like days had passed. I kept glancing at the clock, but time seemed to have lost its meaning. I couldn't help but replay the events in my mind over and over again. The subpoena, the look on Maria's face, the sudden realization that everything I thought I knew was a lie. I tried to focus on something, anything, to keep my mind from spiraling. I picked up the phone again, but the messages, the proof of her betrayal, burned through me. My thoughts were too clouded to think clearly. How could I have missed all of this? How could I have been so blind? I put the phone down, trying to shake off the overwhelming weight of the situation. I walked down the hallway, and as I passed Ethan and Noah's rooms, I stopped. I could hear them talking, arguing through the walls. Their voices were sharp, their words carrying the tension of the moment. I knew what this was. They had heard me. They knew something had happened, something that had shattered the peace of our home. I knocked gently on Ethan's door first. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" I asked, my voice more composed than I felt. Ethan opened the door, his eyes wary, as if he already knew what was coming. "What's going on, Dad? Why did Mom leave?" I swallowed hard. There it was. The question I had been avoiding. The one that cut right to the core of everything. "Your mom, she's gone for now. There are some things we need to talk about, but I need you to trust me. I know this is hard to understand, but it's not your fault. It's something between your mom and me." Ethan's face scrunched in confusion, but he nodded slowly, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Is it because of what happened with her and David?" I froze. My heart skipped a beat. "How did you know about David?" "I overheard you talking about it," he muttered, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't understand, Dad. Why would she do that? Why would she hurt us like that?" His words hit me like a ton of bricks. He was struggling just as I was. Ethan had always been perceptive, and his young heart was already trying to make sense of something that was beyond his years. "I don't have all the answers yet, son," I said quietly. "But I promise you, this is something between your mom and me. We'll figure out together, okay?" Ethan nodded, but the sadness in his eyes lingered. I wanted to protect him, to shield him from all of this, but I couldn't. Not this time. No, it was next. I opened his door gently, finding him sitting on the edge of his bed, playing with a toy car. His small hands gripped it tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, sitting next to him. "I know you probably have a lot of questions. I just wanted to check in with you. How are you feeling?" Noah shrugged, his eyes avoiding mine. "Is Mom coming back?" His voice was small, fragile, and it shattered me in ways I couldn't explain. "I don't know yet, Noah," I whispered, "but we'll be okay. We'll always be okay." He didn't respond, but I could see the tears welling up in his eyes. He was too young to fully understand, but not too young to feel the pain of a family that had fractured. I pulled him into a hug, my heart aching for him, for all of us. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. The next few days were a blur. I kept the house running as best as I could, making sure Ethan and Noah had their meals, helping them with schoolwork, and putting on a brave face for them. But inside, I was falling apart. I didn't know what to feel anymore. I wanted to be angry, but anger felt hollow. I wanted to be sad, but sadness felt like a luxury I didn't have time for. So, I focused on the basics, getting through each day without letting the cracks in my heart show. I knew I had to make sense of what had happened. But every time I looked at the phone, the reality of Maria's betrayal sank deeper. The affair wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate choice, one she had made in secret. I had been too busy with work, too consumed with the life I thought was perfect to see the signs. The thought made me sick. A week passed before I saw Maria again. She came by the house one afternoon, unannounced. I wasn't sure if I should open the door, but I did, hesitantly. There she stood, her eyes red from crying, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Alex," she said, her voice shaky. "I need to talk to you. Please." I stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do, of what to say. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to tell her that there was nothing left to discuss. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, wanted to hear her out. "I owed her that much, didn't I? Come inside," I muttered, stepping aside. She walked in slowly, her eyes never meeting mine. We sat across from each other, the distance between us filled with unspoken words and pain. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I've ruined everything. I don't even know where to begin, but I want to explain. I made a terrible mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like 1,000 pounds. I wanted to shout, to scream at her, to ask why, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I felt a cold emptiness take over. "Why, Maria?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why him? Why David?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't know, Alex. I don't know. It wasn't something I planned. It just happened. But I never wanted to hurt you. Never." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt like I was drowning in them, unable to breathe. My mind raced, but there was no solution, no easy way out. The damage had been done. "You've broken me, Maria," I said quietly, my heart shattering all over again. "I can't trust you anymore. I can't do this." Her face crumpled, and she reached out toward me, but I recoiled, as if the very thought of her touch could burn me. "Please, Alex, please don't say that. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything." But it was too late. The trust was gone. The love had been twisted into something unrecognizable. "Leave," I said, my voice steady but resolute. "It's over." And with that, she left. The days after Maria left were a blur. The silence in the house grew louder, every room echoing with the absence of her presence. I tried to focus on the kids, on keeping things as normal as possible for their sake. But nothing felt normal. I could barely bring myself to speak to anyone beyond simple pleasantries. My mind was consumed with thoughts of what had happened, of the betrayal that I could never fully erase. Ethan, despite his maturity, was struggling. I could see it in the way he carried himself, his shoulders slumping under an invisible weight. He was trying so hard to be strong for Noah, but I knew he was hurting. And Noah, so young and innocent, was caught in a storm he couldn't understand. He would look at me with wide eyes, asking questions I didn't have answers to. "When is Mom coming home, Dad?" he would ask in the quiet of the night, his voice full of hope, unaware of the gravity of the situation. I spent the first few days alone, processing the news, sifting through the broken pieces of my life. I couldn't help but think back on everything. The years I had spent building my career, the moments I had missed with my kids, and the times I had overlooked Maria's needs. There were so many signs, so many things I chose to ignore. Was I to blame for not seeing it? For not noticing the distance that had crept in between us? Maybe I'd been so absorbed in my own life, in the pursuit of success, that I failed to see how much she was struggling. But in the back of my mind, I knew that none of it justified what Maria had done. She had made a choice. She had betrayed me, and now there was no going back. A few days later, I decided to go through some of Maria's things. There was no other way. I needed to understand, to see if I could find any reason for what had happened. But as I went through her clothes, her books, and the little trinkets she kept around the house, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. These were the things she had left behind, the things that had once made our home feel like ours. Now, they were just remnants of a life that was slipping away from me. I came across the photo album, the one we used to look through together during the holidays, laughing at how much the kids had grown. I opened it slowly, my fingers tracing the edges of the pictures. There we were, young, happy, full of dreams. And now all I could see was the lie. As I flipped through the pages, I paused on a picture of Maria and me on our wedding day. We were so full of hope, so sure that nothing could tear us apart. That was before we had kids, before the pressures of life began to build, before things started to change. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I stood up, my heart pounding. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, I saw a familiar face, David's. My stomach churned at the sight of him. The man who had taken everything from me. The man who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He looked nervous, his hands shoved into his pockets, his face tense. "I need to talk to you, Alex," he said, his voice hesitant. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, to tell him that there was no room for him in my life anymore. But another part of me, the part that still wanted answers, needed to know what had happened. So I stepped aside, allowing him in, though my body screamed for me to turn him away. We sat in the living room, the silence between us thick and uncomfortable. He didn't speak right away, and neither did I. I just stared at him, my mind racing with all the things I wanted to ask, all the anger I had stored up for him. But I couldn't find the words. Finally, David spoke. "I know what you're thinking. I know how this looks, and I'm not proud of what I did. But Maria and it wasn't what you think." I narrowed my eyes at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "You don't get to tell me what I think, David. You took my wife. You betrayed me. Don't try to justify this." He looked away, shame written all over his face. "I'm not trying to justify it. I'm just saying that it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I never meant for it to go this far." The words hit me like a slap in the face. You never meant for it to go this far. That was the excuse? That was the justification? My mind reeled with disbelief. So what? This was just some kind of mistake. Some fleeting affair that you thought would be easy to walk away from. David opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "You don't get to explain this to me. You don't get to fix what you broke." He looked at me, his face filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Alex. I never wanted to hurt you." His apology meant nothing. It didn't change the fact that my life was ruined. It didn't take away the pain or the anger or the betrayal. He was just another man in a long line of people who had let me down. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. "I don't need your apology, David. I don't need anything from you. Just leave, and don't come back." David hesitated, but there was nothing more to say. He stood up slowly, avoiding my gaze as he walked toward the door. He paused, looking back at me one last time. "I truly am sorry, Alex," he said quietly before leaving. I slammed the door behind him, my heart still racing. I wanted to scream, to break something, but instead I sank to the floor, my hands covering my face. I had faced Maria. I had faced David. But the hardest thing of all was facing myself. My world had been turned upside down, and I was left to pick up the pieces. The days dragged on, each one feeling like a never-ending cycle of pain and disbelief. I was trapped in my own mind, replaying the events over and over again, wondering if there had been something I could have done differently, something I could have seen. But it didn't matter anymore. Maria was gone, and nothing would ever be the same. I had always been the type of person who thrived on routine. My work, my family, the barbecues, the little moments of normalcy that I clung to. But now, everything felt foreign. The house was too quiet, too still. The children were struggling, and I could see it in their eyes. They were trying to hold it together for my sake, but I knew they were hurting just as much as I was. Ethan had been distant, his mood shifting from anger to sadness and back again. He had always been the strong one, the one who kept things together when life got tough, but this was different. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a hug or a few kind words. This was a deep wound, one that would take time to heal if it ever did. Noah, on the other hand, was too young to fully understand what had happened, but he could feel the change. He would wander through the house at night, calling for his mother, asking when she would come home. Each time, my heart broke a little more. How could I explain this to him? How could I tell him that his mother had chosen to leave, that she had betrayed us all? I threw myself into my work, tried to numb the pain with tasks and deadlines. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the silence at home was unbearable. I couldn't run from it. I couldn't run from the fact that Maria was gone, that my life had been upended in a way I never could have imagined. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I decided to take a walk. I needed space to think, to breathe. The fresh air felt good against my skin, the chill of the evening air a welcome contrast to the suffocating atmosphere at home. I walked for hours, not caring where I was going, just trying to escape the heaviness of my thoughts. As I wandered through the neighborhood, I found myself at a small park. It was quiet, with only a few scattered families enjoying the evening. I sat on a bench, the cold metal biting into my skin, but I didn't mind. The pain in my chest was far worse than any physical discomfort. It was then that I saw him, Ethan, sitting at the edge of the playground, staring at the ground. I knew he had been struggling, but seeing him here alone made something inside me snap. I walked over and sat next to him, not saying anything at first. He didn't look up, but I could see his shoulders shaking, a quiet sob escaping from his lips. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I don't know what to do." I placed a hand on his back, feeling the weight of his grief. He was just a kid, and yet he was carrying the burden of this broken family on his shoulders. I had to be strong for him, for both of them, but in that moment, I realized that I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. We needed help. "You don't have to figure everything out, Ethan," I said softly. "We'll get through this together. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." He nodded, though his eyes were still full of pain. But what if things never get better? What if Mom doesn't come back? I didn't have an answer for him. I couldn't promise him that things would go back to how they were, because deep down, I knew they never would. But I could promise him that I would always be there, that we would face this together, no matter how hard it got. "We'll make it through, Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "We'll find a new way forward." We sat there for a long time, neither of us saying anything, just letting the quiet settle around us. I didn't know how to fix this, how to make it right, but for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. As we walked back home together, I realized that the road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be moments of anger, of sadness, and of frustration. There would be days when it felt like we would never get past this. But there would also be moments of light, moments of healing, and moments of strength. We had each other, and that, for now, was enough. The next few weeks passed in a haze. Maria had continued to visit the kids, but it was clear that the connection between us was forever broken. The awkwardness, the unspoken tension, hung in the air whenever she was around. She tried to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to listen. She had chosen David, chosen the affair, and no amount of apologies would change that. Maria eventually moved in with her mother, and though I was relieved that she was no longer living in our house, the absence of her presence weighed on me. The children missed her, of course, but I could see the emotional toll it was taking on them. Ethan withdrew further, throwing himself into his schoolwork and avoiding conversations with me. Noah, still so young, tried to fill the silence with questions that I couldn't answer. And then, there were the nights, the long, sleepless nights when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if things would ever get better, wondering if I would ever find peace. But every time I thought about Maria, about the betrayal, the silence would creep in, and I would remind myself that I couldn't change the past. I could only move forward. Moving forward was all I had left. The months dragged by, each day blending into the next like the endless cycle of a life I had no control over. But somehow, amidst the wreckage of my life, I started to pick up the pieces, one small fragment at a time. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick, but with each passing day, I began to realize that healing didn't come in one big, sweeping moment. It came in small, almost imperceptible steps. Ethan and Noah began to settle into a new routine. Ethan still kept to himself, retreating into his room with his books or his music, but I noticed small moments of him opening up. He would talk to me about his schoolwork, about friends he had made, and occasionally he'd ask about Maria, his mother, in a way that suggested he was trying to make sense of everything. I didn't have all the answers for him, but I listened. I made sure to show him that I was there, no matter how quiet he became. Noah, on the other hand, was a little more direct. He still asked questions about when his mom was coming home, but now his questions had a weight to them, an understanding that something had changed, that the world wasn't quite as simple as it had once been. I took him out for walks, to the park, to do things that would give him a sense of normalcy. But it wasn't easy. Every time I looked at him, I was reminded of what Maria had done to our family, to him. There were nights when the silence in the house felt deafening, especially after the kids went to bed. That's when I would sit on the couch and reflect, allowing the grief to wash over me. But I also began to see the silver lining in the cracks. I started to think more about the life I wanted for myself and my children. I couldn't let the past dictate my future. I needed to find strength, not just for them, but for me. Work became a refuge of sorts. I threw myself into projects, into tasks, focusing on the things that demanded my attention. But even in the office, my mind wandered back to Maria, to the life we once had. Sometimes I would catch myself thinking of the woman I had loved, the one I had built my life with, and the one who had betrayed everything I thought we had. But those thoughts grew fainter with each passing week. One morning, as I sat at my desk at work, an email popped up from an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Lily. She was someone I had dated in college before Maria, someone who had been a bright light in my life before I met Maria and started my family. I hadn't seen or heard from her in a long time, but there was something in her message that caught my attention. It read simply, asterisk, I heard about what happened, Alex. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. I'd love to catch up sometime. Asterisk. At first, I was hesitant. I hadn't even thought about Lily in years, and part of me felt guilty, like reaching out to her would somehow betray the life I had built with Maria. But as I read the message again, I realized that maybe this was the opportunity one needed. Not to replace Maria, not to forget about her, but to rediscover who I was outside of the pain. I replied, telling Lily that it had been a long time, but that I was open to catching up. She responded almost immediately, and we set a date for a casual coffee the following week. When the day arrived, I felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. As I walked into the coffee shop, I spotted her right away. She hadn't changed much, still the same bright smile, the same energy. We talked about everything and nothing at all, but I noticed that with Lily, I didn't feel the weight of my past. There was no judgment, no history to cling to. It felt like we were just two people reconnecting, no strings attached. As we caught up, I realized something. I had spent so much time thinking about Maria's betrayal that I had forgotten to think about myself. I had forgotten about the person I was before marriage, before children, before all the pain. Lily didn't ask me about Maria or the affair. She didn't even bring it up. Instead, we talked about old memories, about college, about the future. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something like hope. Our meeting wasn't about closure. It wasn't about trying to rekindle something that had long since burned out. But it was a reminder that I was still me, that I still had value, and that life didn't stop after heartbreak. In the weeks that followed, Lily and I kept in touch, meeting up occasionally for coffee or lunch. Our conversations were simple, but they gave me a sense of normalcy. Slowly, I began to feel more like myself, not the broken man I had been, but someone who could still move forward. It wasn't about forgetting Maria. It was about moving on, about finding peace within myself. Back home, the atmosphere was still tense, but it had softened. I focused more on the kids, on creating a routine that felt stable and safe for them. I began to include them more in our day-to-day life, asking for their help around the house, and finding ways to spend more quality time together. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when Noah asked about his mom, or when Ethan would look at me with those sad eyes, as if waiting for me to tell him everything was going to be okay. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat on the couch and reflected on everything that had happened. It had been months since Maria left, and the house, though still quieter than it had once been, felt more like home than it had in a long time. I had learned that healing wasn't linear. It wasn't something that happened overnight, and it certainly wasn't something I could force. But I had learned to take it day by day, to accept the hurt, but also to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. I thought about the future, not the future with Maria, but the future with Ethan, Noah, and myself. It was a future I was still learning to embrace, one step at a time. There were days when I felt like I was taking 2 steps backward, but there were also days when I felt like I was moving forward, even if it was just a small step. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It never was, but I was ready to walk it one day at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I might just be okay.
The weeks turned into months, and though I still felt the weight of the past, I began to find a rhythm in my new life. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I focused on my kids, Ethan and Noah, and on finding the balance between being a father, a professional, and someone who had to rebuild his life. The silence in the house wasn't as deafening as it used to be. I had come to accept it, even learned to appreciate it in its own way. The stillness was no longer filled with betrayal but with the possibility of healing. Ethan had started to open up more. He began talking about his friends at school, about things that made him laugh, about the future. We didn't talk about Maria much anymore, but every so often, I could see the hurt behind his words. He was still grappling with the loss of his mother, the fracture in our family that he couldn't yet comprehend. But he was trying, and that was all I could ask for. Noah, though younger, had become more resilient than I had imagined. His questions about where Maria was still lingered, but there were fewer of them, and the sadness in his eyes had softened. He spent more time in his room, drawing or playing games, trying to make sense of a world that had turned upside down. But there were moments when I saw a smile on his face, moments when he would run to me after school with a story or a new drawing, and I would see that glimmer of hope that made me believe everything would be okay in the end. I continued seeing Lily, though it wasn't as frequent as before. Our conversations remained simple but meaningful. She had her own life, her own path, and I didn't expect anything from her. But I appreciated her company and the way she allowed me to rediscover parts of myself that I had forgotten. She never pushed me to talk about the past, but every time we met, I could feel myself growing stronger. She had become, in many ways, a mirror for the person I was becoming, a person who was learning to live again. And then there was work. My career had always been a central part of my life, but after Maria left, I had approached it with a different perspective. I no longer felt the pressure to succeed at all costs. I still cared about my work, but I no longer allowed it to consume me. I made time for my family, for the moments that mattered, and I tried not to let the weight of the past dictate every decision I made. There were still days when I felt the sting of what Maria had done, when the memories of our life together would rush back and catch me off guard. I would find myself looking at old photos or hearing a song that reminded me of her, and the grief would wash over me again. But it was different now. It wasn't as sharp. It didn't break me the way it used to. It was more like a scar, a reminder of what I had been through, but no longer something that controlled me. Maria had tried to reach out a few times, sending messages asking how the kids were, how I was. But I had learned that there was no point in holding on to something that no longer existed. The trust had been broken, and while I could never forget, I knew I couldn't live in the past forever. I had forgiven her, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to move forward. The anger, the bitterness, it was eating me alive, and I refused to let it define me anymore. Forgiveness wasn't about her. It was about me, about finding peace within myself. I couldn't hold on to the pain any longer. I had my kids to think about, a future to build, and a life to live. One day as I was walking to the car after work, I spotted a familiar face in the parking lot. It was Maria. She stood there waiting for me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen her in months, and suddenly, here she was, standing in front of me like a ghost from the past. "Alex," she said softly, her voice shaky. "Can we talk?" I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. Everything inside me wanted to turn around and walk away, to tell her that there was nothing left to discuss. But I knew that wasn't the right thing to do. Not for me and not for the kids. I nodded, gesturing toward a bench nearby. We sat down, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. "I've missed you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've ruined everything. But I want to make things right. I don't know how to fix what I've done, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at her, trying to find the woman I had once loved in the person sitting before me. But the truth was I couldn't see her anymore. She was a stranger now, someone who had made choices that I could never forgive. And yet, part of me still wanted to believe that she was capable of change. "I know you're sorry," I said quietly, my voice steady. "But sorry doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't change the past." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I know. But I had to tell you. I had to say it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope, one day, you'll find it in your heart to let go of the anger." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I had let go of the anger not for her, but for me. I had forgiven her, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to move on. "I've let go of the anger, Maria," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But I can't go back. What we had, it's gone. And I've had to learn to live without it." She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the regret in her eyes. But there was no turning back. What was broken could not be fixed, not by words, not by apologies. It was over. She stood up, wiping her eyes. "I understand," she whispered before turning and walking away. As I watched her leave, I realized something important. I had finally found peace. Not because of anything she had said, but because I had chosen to move forward. I had let go of the past, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly free. The future was still uncertain, but it no longer seemed so daunting. I had my children, I had my life, and I had the strength to face whatever came next. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it.